You are listening to Blooming with myself, Laura the Lesbian. This podcast explores my story of discovering that I was gay at age 46 after coming out of a controlling religion. The podcast is for late blooming queer people and their spouses and their family, or anyone seeking better understanding of themselves and also just humanity. It's also for any former Mormon seeking stories to help them heal from their religious trauma. Lastly, this podcast is meant to be heard sequentially. So if you're hearing this somewhere in the middle, go back and listen to the early episodes. Well, hey there, everybody. I'm Laura, and I'm an ex-Mormon late blooming lesbian. If you've never heard of the term late bloomer lesbian, it just basically means someone who kind of got started in their life, maybe married or had children to a man, and later they realize that they actually are attracted to women. And this is kind of what I'm going to do is tell my story from the beginning on this podcast with episodes in between. So some of them will be parts of my story, and then other times I'll have episodes with things like deconstructing my religion of origin, which for me was Mormonism, and also episodes about the patriarchy that I faced growing up and how that influenced my complete lack of awareness of my sexual orientation. And also I want to talk some about the sexual trauma of being raised in a high demand religion with strong elements of compulsory heterosexuality. And while I'm here, I'll just go ahead and define that for anyone who's new to that term, because it's my goal to make this podcast a safe space for anyone who's curious about what's going on, what's this phenomenon of late blooming lesbians, whether you are one yourself or you love someone who is a late blooming lesbian. Compulsory heterosexuality simply refers to the term, or not the term, but the concept that within patriarchy, meaning a society that is set up by men for the benefit of men, which is us, it's most places in the world. Almost no place is a matriarchal society. Within that construct, women serve the patriarchy, and of course, in a patriarchal society, there's not really space for lesbians, because how is that benefiting the men who are in charge? And so many of us are raised in a way that we don't even realize that there is an option for us to be sexually attracted to women. And so I'm going to be getting into that farther along, but I don't want to leave any undefined terms just kind of like hanging there, stopping people from being able to hear what I have to say. So what I want to do is explain to you for a moment why I'm even doing this podcast. I mean, I am a busy person. I already have another podcast, and I own 2 to 3 businesses, depending on how you count them. And I take care of humans as a profession. So why am I, even though I have all these things to do, why am I stopping my life to do this podcast? And what I want to propose to you is that stories unite people. So whether it's reading in a book or hearing someone's story on a podcast or a live speech, stories are what unite us. And right now in our society, we need more coming together and less division. And so I'm going to use my story as a way to bring people together. It's kind of an interesting story, to be honest. There's a lot of interesting things that go into it. And I already know that other people find it fascinating, because I have a TikTok channel that I started a couple of months ago about this topic. And I am telling you right now, on a daily basis, at least one person reaches out to me to say, thank you so much for telling this story, because my sister is gay and this helps me understand this better, or I am gay and nobody knows and I'm feeling very alone and your story is helping me. So this is what I'm doing, is I'm using this podcasting platform that I'm already familiar with to try to reach more people, because stories unite. It is my goal to help create a community where right now there is a great lack of community. And again, I know this because these lonely or people who are misunderstanding their relatives or their wives, they are reaching out to me and they're lonely and scared. And I can only reach so many people on TikTok. Some people are like, ooh, TikTok. So yeah, I want to create a community where people know that they're not alone. And then the other thing that I'd really like to do is create understanding between perceived divisions. So where I believe that we humans are a lot more alike than we realize, but right now with the way social media takes our feeds and puts them into these tunnels where things are repeated over and over, we start to think that we have less in common with the people sitting next to us. And that would include, someone who is a different religion than us, whether because somebody left that religion of origin, or we're just coming from different sides, or even just men and women. So fascinating. 93% of my followers on TikTok are women. And usually if someone's getting on to complain about one of my videos, it's a man. And so, there's that lack of understanding of sides. And my goal is to create this podcast as a safe space for anyone who is curious and open-minded and wants to learn more about the other side, which I'm saying in air quotes, just in case you're listening and not watching this, and also to help people who are here with me as another late blooming lesbian to know that they are not alone. So we're going to try to bring people together. There's one exception, one group of people who I would say probably would find this podcast as not a welcoming space for them. And that would be the top levels of leadership in the Mormon Church, those who benefit either financially or in power from what has happened to me and thousands or maybe even millions of others like me. So usually we're talking about the top, probably fewer than 100 men at the top of the Mormon Church who have benefited or are now benefiting from, honestly, the subjugation of all of their members, but for sure the women who are at the bottom, even compared to like the 12-year-old boys who already start to receive the church bestowed authority over women. So yeah, unless you're one of those 100 guys, come on in, pull up a seat. I'm going to start to tell you my story here in a few minutes from the very beginning. Now, I wish I could tell you that by the end of this podcast, I get to give you my happily ever after ending. But in truth, my life would possibly be described right now as a shit show. In its current state, there are things that are unsettled. And so you'll notice that I refer to things in my present day in sort of a vague verb tense, vague state, because I don't exactly know how everything is going to turn out. And this will become more obvious as I'm telling my story, but maybe my life's going to be a shit show for this whole podcast. I don't know, but I can tell you that where I'm at right now, even though I don't know how things are going to turn out, I'm really happy. I'm the happiest I've ever been because I now understand myself so much better than I did before. So a little bit of background about myself. I am in my mid to late 40s, and I live in what would be described as flyover country. And obviously I was raised Mormon, and I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 4, including a stepdaughter. And as I mentioned before, I am a business owner. So one of the businesses that I own is from the medical profession that I'm in. And then I'm also a certified life coach. And this is typically right now, the coaching that I do is not for late bloomer lesbians. It's for the people who are in my medical profession. But I do have that additional understanding of we humans, our feelings, our thoughts, how our brains work, that I think is going to add a really rich element to this story, because just I have some extra insight because of the time that I have spent learning about how our brains and our hearts work. And like I said, I have a TikTok channel, so this podcast is an extension of that. And if you want to find me on TikTok, I'm Laura the Lesbian Ex-Mormon. Should be fairly easy to find. At this point, it's mid-April and I have 10,000 followers. I just surpassed that the other day, which was kind of fun. And like I said, I have been shocked to find so many people reaching out. They can't write to me on TikTok unless I follow them too, which I only follow a few people. So it's fascinating the creative ways that people have found to try to have a conversation with me. And it just speaks to the fact that these women feel so isolated, and that they hear my videos and they're like, oh my goodness, I need to be friends with this girl. I need to talk to her about this thing that I haven't been able to talk to anybody about, which is one of the reasons why I decided to just go ahead and start this podcast, just to make it a little bit easier to find me, to get a hold of me, and to let my story help more people. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to give you some framework here. I've told you a little bit about myself. I'm going to go back in time now to the 1970s, and I'm going to spend the rest of this episode telling you basically about my family's origin story, and bring you up into, I don't know, high school or something like that before I cut this off. I don't want any of these episodes to be too long. But I was born to, so my family, my mom's family and my dad's family were both generational Mormon families. On my mom's side, one of my ancestors owned land in Nauvoo, which is one of the places where the Mormons used to live, next to the founder, Joseph Smith. And I have an ancestor who was the first dentist in Utah. I think he was the first dentist on the west side of the Mississippi. I'm not sure about that one. Do not quote me on it. But so on my mom's side, way back, and then even on my dad's side, generations of Mormon families. And somehow my dad's family ended up here in Iowa. That's the state that I live in now and the state that I grew up in. And my dad brought my mom here. She was from California, and they started their family here in Iowa. And I was the first daughter, the second child, and there are 7 children in my family. And since we were here in Iowa, being Mormon was kind of a minority. It was something that set me apart from my peers. My parents raised us in a very loving home, and they definitely were doing their very, very best to raise us. And they did so within the framework that they understood to be the best, which was to raise us in a very strict Mormon dogma. So, for example, what I learned about sex is some of the most conservative teaching that you could ever teach a small child. Most of it was not from their lips. They let the church go ahead and do that. I had very little said to me about sex at all from my parents. And here's some examples of things that were strict in our family. Not really the sex stuff, because I want to save that for another episode, but just to give you an example of rules that we have to follow as Mormons. So Sundays were very strict. Stay in your Sunday clothes all day after you go to church. Don't watch TV. Only listen to sacred music. I remember one time as a child, I was playing on the porch. I was walking along the railing, just doing some balancing acts in my mind, walking along the railing, and I slipped and fell. I fell off of the porch. So, a good 4 feet or so from the ground. And I truly believed that the reason that I had fallen is because I was playing on the porch on Sunday. That's the kind of attitude that we had about the Sabbath day. Definitely didn't watch TV or buy anything on Sunday. We weren't supposed to do anything that caused someone else to have to work on Sunday. Another example would be the Mormons' attitude about coffee and tea. So you can't drink coffee or tea or take in any tobacco as a believing Mormon, but also there was an extension of that. We weren't supposed to have any caffeinated soda as well. They have these laws of health. So no alcohol, no tea, no tobacco, no coffee, yada, 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 all that stuff. Also, we weren't allowed to swear, and that definitely included shut up and other very minor, but we couldn't say but, we were supposed to say bottom, and we weren't supposed to say breast. We were supposed to say bosom, and for fart we were supposed to say past gas. So like there was a very prescribed way to use language in our home, and that extended to the movies and media as well. So if something were rated R, for sure we were not allowed to watch that. But even if it was PG-13, my parents were going to be wary of that until they felt like it was going to be appropriate. I remember there was a magazine that came to our elementary school for the girls. I think it was called Young Miss or something like that. And my parents actually had that magazine removed from the elementary school's library. Oh my gosh, my friends were so mad at me that day. So you have to understand that from the Mormon perspective, the way we are as humans is oppositional to the way God wants us to be. In fact, there's a scripture that we're required to memorize as teenagers. I can't remember where it's from, somewhere in the Book of Mormon, and it's the natural man is an enemy to God. So we grow up believing that we're inherently bad, which can create problems, and I'll get into that as we go, but that's that shame / guilt place was kind of the default in Mormonism. We're naughty and we need God's help to be worthy. And not only God's help, but also we need to do certain things to be worthy of God's love and help. Growing up in the Mormon culture was also somewhat of a time suck. There were always meetings, always, always, always. So for example, in high school, I would have church on Sundays for, I would say 4 hours. I mean, the services were 3, but I always went to choir as well. So that's 4 hours, half a day on Sunday. And then every weekday at 6 a.m., I had what's called seminary, which is when you go to scripture study class before school. Unless you live in Utah, then you can go during the school day. But for us, it was at 6 a.m., even during those Iowa winters. You get up at 5 a.m. and it's -10 outside and the wind is howling, and you got to get in your car and drive your ass over to the church for seminary. And then also on Wednesday evenings, we would have church as well. So hours and hours and hours growing up, especially after that in college, also it was basically the same. Plus I served a Mormon mission, which I'll get into in another episode. That's 18 months of like 11 hours a day. And then there's also the element of tithing, which becomes really important as I explain Mormon culture later on. So the concept of tithing within Mormonism is that we pay 10% of our gross income to the church, and we answer to the church authorities to that on a yearly basis to just say whether or not we're actually paying the full amount we owe. And also, if we're not paying the full amount, then we're not considered worthy to participate in all of the parts of Mormonism, including attending the more sacred of the services, which is called the temple. And I'll explain to that later. But all of this background to say, if you're an ex-Mormon and you're like, yeah, this isn't anything new, but also maybe you heard some things that sound really familiar, just to help you understand that the way I was born, we were kind of taught that we were set apart a bit from the world. We weren't in the world. We weren't of the world, I mean, but we were in it. We were kind of stuck in it, but trying to be an example to others and to live this better, and I'm saying that in air quotes, this better life. And this extended also to my role as a girl, as someone who was born, assigned as female at birth. I was taught from the time that I was very, very young. In fact, I remember, I was taught that it was my main role in this life to be a wife and a mother. And I remember being very young when I learned the first song about this, and it was, "When I grow up, I want to be a mother and have a family." And I was like maybe 3 when I learned that. I still remember it to this day. And that's just the beginning of the dogma that was pushed on us as to what we were supposed to do as a girl. It was very, very clear that aspiring to a professional career was naughty. So you were supposed to think about a backup career just in case something went wrong with your husband, but also aspiring to something other than devoting all of your time to raising children and then also to serving in the church was considered to be a compromise. And I was taught this from the time that I was extremely young, and over and over and over again. I cannot tell you how many church meetings I attended from the time that I was probably 11, where we were sat down and told, don't go to work. Don't get a job once you have children. Have fun now, but once you have children, your life is theirs. And that's how you show Heavenly Father that you love him and that you accept your role. And as this role as a wife and a mother, it was also very clear to us, which the church has backed off on somewhat since then, but it was very clear at the time that the man would be the one who was in charge at home. So like when I got married, I was told multiple times that yes, my husband was going to be the head of the household, but I was the neck that turned the head, and that was supposed to make me feel really good. Oh my goodness. So lots of expectations on what it meant to be a girl. And of course, as I mentioned with the compulsory heterosexuality, there was absolutely no space in there for not even just maybe I would be attracted to girls, but even learning that sexual attraction and the feeling of wanting to draw closer to another person or be aroused, none of that was discussed at all as far as that being okay. And some of you might say who weren't raised in Mormonism, well, that's fine. I mean, my church didn't teach me how to be a sexual person. But I have to argue with that just a little bit, because Mormonism encompassed all aspects of our lives. I was even told what kind of underwear to wear. So what do I drink? What do I eat? What do I do with my time? What do I wear underneath my shirt and my skirts? That was determined by them, I mean, and how should a marriage be? So for them to not teach me that it was okay to teach me everything else, but then not tell me that it was okay to be a sexual being, it was a gross mistreatment in my opinion. It hurt me, and I'm going to tell you more about how that became a problem as I move forward in these episodes. Okay, just a tiny bit more for today, and then you'll have to wait for episode 2 to hear more. This one really played hard into my future choice to become a professional despite my religious upbringing, which is that my father had an undiagnosed medical condition for decades that made him kind of spacey at times and therefore unemployable for most of my growing up years. And of course, since we live in America, it was a vicious cycle because that spacey condition that could have been managed with medication, there were toxins in his brain that weren't getting properly cleaned up. And because he was unemployable, that also meant that he did not have health insurance or access to care. Actually, none of us had access to care, but that included him. And that he was a brilliant, brilliant man, but he couldn't hold a job. And so my parents had these 7 children, but didn't really have a way to properly provide for the family. And so that fell to my mother, who was woefully unprepared to financially care for a family of 9 because of the teachings, because of that dogma of placing the girl in a place where she was supposed to know how to cook and bear the babies and feed the babies, and the man was going to provide the money, but that didn't happen in our home. And I saw my parents struggle to keep us fed and housed. Sometimes our electricity would get turned off. Sometimes the only food in the home was some potatoes or some day old bakery that got donated by the local grocery store. My mother would hold a job at the mall, and then that would pay for things like gasoline and the mortgage. And then the food had to come from somewhere else. So she would go to the plasma place and do what she called blood sucking, which was, having her plasma sold. Then she would take her $20 bill, because that's what you got back then, and she would march straight over to Aldi and buy whatever she could for the $20. And that would be what would feed us for the week until she was allowed to do the plasma again. And my dad wasn't allowed to do this because he had that medical condition. So at the plasma place, they found these liver enzymes that were elevated, and they were like, "Do you have an alcohol problem? I'm sorry, we can't take your blood in this condition. You need to see a doctor," which of course he never did because we didn't have health insurance. So I grew up seeing my parents struggle with this, and I vowed that that would not be the case for me. And I was actually a very good student, so I had the potential to do something, even though I really, really just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom because that's what I had been taught. And I'm going to close this episode by telling you one more thing, and I'll explain it to you in the next episode. Looking back, I can see things that pointed to me being gay, but I was completely oblivious. And I will tell you that I was very boy crazy. I was obsessed with who was going to ask me out and who liked me and who could I get to like me. And I'm going to tell you more about that in the next episode, why I think that is. And I think that's probably enough for today. Thank you so much for listening to this whole episode. I look forward to sharing more with you, and I hope that my story makes a difference for many of you. Please share this with people. Make sure you subscribe, so that you can get more of the episodes. And if you want to contact me, you can go to laurathelesbianexmormon.com. Okay? Thanks. Talk to you soon.